Hello, my name is Tyler Wendt, and this is my instructional video on how to make an instructional video. So let's get started. To begin, spend some time brainstorming several topics you are considerably knowledgeable and passionate about. These can be anything from how to cook a delicious 7-layer lasagna, or how to drive a manual car, or even how to make a graphical user interface that does absolutely nothing. Ideally, you want topics that can be broken down into simpler steps while remaining interesting and coherent to the average viewer. Once you have several topics to choose from, it may be helpful to refresh your memory and gain new viewpoints by researching and exploring different solutions to your selection. Continue this process until you find something you feel comfortable with showcasing and explaining. Then, start brainstorming how best to break down your selection and begin visualizing how your instructional video should flow. Next, we can move on to creating a script. Whether it's a general outline or word-by-word blueprint, it is often helpful to have a document that keeps your information organized in a clear and logical order. It aids in keeping your video interesting while retaining all the information needed. A script essentially allows you to make your video flow better by planning out the entire thing from the beginning. It also allows you to revise as new information is added, or to modify specific parts without necessarily changing the overall feel of your video or forgetting something essential. When creating your script, remember to think about your target audience and write with the intended viewer in mind. Be aware of any previous knowledge that may be required and determine the best terminology to use. Ultimately then, try to keep the video interesting and informative while remaining easy enough for the average viewer to understand and follow along. From this, start visualizing how you would like to frame each shot with something called a storyboard. A storyboard is basically a sequence of quick sketches that details each shot you have planned. It helps to transcribe the video from your imagination onto paper and plan out each shot in a realistic and manageable way through the use of thumbnails. These thumbnails are typically smaller images that describe how each frame is laid out for your benefit. Therefore, try to include as much information as you need, but don't spend too much time on each drawing. These are meant to be quick sketches, often with directions, notes, and dialogue added as needed, that serve as a rough look of the overall video. This may also be a good time to think about how you'd like to frame each shot from the camera's point of view. While there are many techniques and guidelines on the best way to portray a subject, such as the rule of thirds for example, it is generally a good practice to focus on the subject's head or head and shoulders. Of course, this is all subjective and ultimately depends on how you want to portray the topic selected. In the end, try to keep it visually interesting without being too distracting or incoherent. Now for the fun part, filming your video. Videos today are often recorded in 1080p. That's a resolution of 1920 pixels by 1080 pixels, at around 30 frames per second or higher. So try to select a camera that can match that. Most smartphones nowadays can accomplish this, but depending on your production level, target audience, and additional filming needs, it may be worthwhile to invest in a higher quality camera. Familiarize yourself with your selected recording device and understand how to get the best quality out of it. Additionally, if using a higher end camera, determine the best file format for your needs. Next, try to find a relatively quiet and well lit area, especially if the majority of your video will be focused on a subject. Try to control the lighting as much as possible and avoid mixing outside and indoor lights. If you feel the need to add additional lighting to your scene, don't use any harsh lighting as it can create hot spots on the subject's face and may blow out other details. Adjust the lighting if possible, as well as the camera's exposure as needed. Furthermore, set the camera around eye level, using either a tripod or holder method of your choice, about an arm's length away depending on your audio quality. Audio is almost essential when creating an instructional video, so it's important to make your audio the best it can be. Therefore, an external microphone is highly recommended, especially if your camera's built-in audio recording device is less than stellar. If you don't have access to an external microphone, zoom the camera out and move it closer to the subject's face. Try to minimize any background noise and stay relatively still. Film some test recordings where you speak at different volumes and move the camera around to find the best quality. If you do have access to an external microphone, try to set it as close as you can in front of your face, depending on whether you want it in frame or not. More professional settings will typically have the microphone on something called a boom, a long pole that holds the microphone close to the subject, typically from above. However, setting the microphone on a table in front of you should also work just fine. Again, make test recordings in order to fine-tune the best positioning and settings of the microphone. Quality external microphones will often have parameters like gain that you can control to adjust the input level of your audio. Ultimately then, speak clearly, calmly, and confidently for the best results. Finally, we can move on to editing the video itself. This might be the most difficult part of the whole process, especially if you haven't planned it out well from the beginning. Start by transferring the video files from your camera onto your computer and place them in an area you'll remember for later. Then, simply drag those transferred files into your project space within the video editing program of your choice. For this instructional video, I'll be showcasing Camtasia 2019, but there are many options to choose from. Try to select one based on your level of experience, or at least whatever you have access to. Next, place your video files in the timeline in the order in which they should appear. I recommend doing any polishing, color grading, or other visual improvements now, before you split these files into smaller sections. In addition, you may want to edit the audio separately in an audio editing program such as Audacity to really extract the most quality out of your recordings. Once you have your separate clips in the correct order, spice it up by adding transitions, titles, and royalty-free music or sound effects as desired. Give the viewer something to focus on besides the subject's face the entire time. However, remember to keep the video clear and coherent, so refrain from using too much text, flashy transitions, obnoxious music, or other distracting additions. Furthermore, it may be beneficial when editing to get outside opinions on what is helpful to the viewer and what is confusing. Additionally, don't be afraid to cut out extra fat or change sections around as needed. In the end, just try to keep the overall video simple and enjoyable. Once you have your video edited, it's time to export. For the most part, I recommend exporting the video as a .mp4 with the same resolution and frame rate as your input file, or at least 1080p at 30 frames per second. However, if using this instructional video in more specific scenarios, it may be more advantageous to export it in a different way. If you're limited in size, for instance, a smaller resolution or different format may be required. Try to save it in a place you'll remember and give it an accurate title. Finally, do a last watch through to make sure nothing got distorted or changed in the export and revise as needed if something messed up. Again, my name is Tyler Wendt, and this has been my instructional video on how to make an instructional video. I hope it was helpful, informative, and at least slightly entertaining. Thank you for your time, and take care.